We have two stories of miracles in the first reading in the Gospel today. In the first reading, we have the story of Naaman, the commander of the army of Aram. The Arameans were a Semitic people who were constantly warring with their Jewish neighbors in Israel and Judah. During the particular time period in which our first reading occurs, the Arameans had become dominant over Israel, not really conquering it, but acting as the regional bully. They would send raiding parties into villages, killing some and enslaving others, taking all of the livestock, grain, and precious metals or stones, and the government of Israel, with its capital in Samaria, was helpless to stop these raids. They fought back. The devastation would have been far worse. And so there was this acceptance that this was just the way things were. Though the prophets and scribes were very open in their condemnation of this behavior by the Arameans. After all, being a Semitic people, they were cousins to the Israelites and Judahites. Which leads us to the story in the first reading. A young girl has been taken as a slave during one of these raids, and now serves the wife of the commander of the army of Aram. The commander has leprosy and has tried everything to be cured. And when I say leprosy, we are probably not talking about Hansen's disease, but rather something more like what we would call eczema, psoriasis, or rosacea. There was something that made his skin uncomfortable to be in and disconcerting to look at. And so, having tried everything else, the enslaved Israelite girl suggests to the wife of the commander that he go to see Elisha, the protege and successor to Elijah, who now leads the prophets of Yahweh in the northern kingdom. Now, Elisha and Elijah were not exactly on good terms with the kings of the northern kingdom, as they were opposed to the accommodationist positions that these kings took toward the surrounding kingdoms, and their willingness to allow the worship of deities other than Yahweh, and the growing inequalities between the rich and powerful and the poor and disadvantaged. So when the king of Aram sends his commander Naaman to the king of Israel to have him healed by Elisha, the king of Israel is upset. He does not know where Elisha is or how to get in touch with him, but if he does not set up this meeting, Naaman is going to unleash outright war on Israel. Now Elisha gets wind of this, and not wanting the Aramean army to invade, comes out of hiding to offer his services. And Naaman goes to see him. But Elisha, and Elijah before him, is a bit of a curmudgeon. And instead of going out to greet the great general and performing all kinds of showy rituals, he just sends a servant to tell Naaman to bathe in a specific river, which causes Naaman to become furious. He has been trying all kinds of increasingly complex and intricate cures. If washing in a river would have cured him, he wouldn't have been threatening to go to war to be cured. But his advisors talk him into following Elisha's instructions, and he is cured. And relations between Aram and Israel improve for a time as a result. In the Gospel, we have the story of the 70 disciples being sent out by Jesus to the surrounding villages. They take nothing with them but the clothes on their backs. And where they are welcomed, they perform healings and are able to drive out demons. And then they return with news of these healings to Jesus. Now, in both of these stories, there are miraculous cures that come from God. We could try to explain them, talk about the exact mineral composition of the water that Elisha sent Naaman to bathe in, or the cultural understanding of illness in ancient Galilee, but that misses the point. These were miracles. They came from God, and through them people were cured. They're presented to bring us into belief in God as the one God, and to reinforce the credentials of Jesus and Elisha as being sent by God. They are wondrous to hear about, but they are not particularly useful in helping us live our lives today. That said, I would suggest that if we look beyond the miracles themselves, there is a lesson in both these stories for us. You see, neither miracle happened on its own in isolation. The miracles only happened when they were allowed to occur. When ordinary people welcomed the power of God in, when Naaman went to bathe in the river, and when the villagers provided food, drink, and shelter for the 70 disciples. And this is where we find a truth that extends to us today. When we invite one another in, when we trust one another, when we provide for one another, only then do miracles happen. And in this time of hyper-partisanship, increasing distrust, and economic and political instability, I would offer that simply being willing to trust one another, to care for one another, put one another's welfare before our own is a miracle. And it's the type of miracle upon which this highly improbable and always evolving nation was founded. For all of its flaws, and there were and are many, it is important to acknowledge on this Independence Day weekend the innovativeness of the experiment that is the United States, a nation founded not on the premise of might is right, but on interdependence, common sacrifice, and free and fair elections. And as we celebrate this weekend as Americans, we as Christians are called upon to renew our pledge to love one another as ourselves and build God's kingdom here on earth by caring for the least among us and ensuring none among us goes hungry, thirsty, or homeless, and that everyone, even men like Naaman, who we may consider sinners and enemies, receive treatment for their illnesses. Amen.